Hi, Mike Zipser here at Balticon 50, and we are here in our makeshift little studio with Ada Palmer, who's an author, a historian, and a musician. Ada, welcome to Fast Forward.
Thank you.
Now, you're got your first book that's out as we speak. It's been out a couple of weeks now.
2 weeks, yeah.
And it's called Too Like the Lightning.
Yes.
And it's a fascinating book. It takes place in the 25th century, and the main viewpoint character is a criminal.
Yes, a convict.
A convict. Why don't you tell us, it's an interesting society. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that world is like?
I mean, a lot of world building went into that, but there are a bunch of big differences. A main one is that the geographic nation, as it's called by the characters in the book, is a thing of the past at this point. Transportation has gotten faster. There's a system of flying cars which move around the world so fast that you can get from anywhere to anywhere else in 2 hours. And if you think about it sociologically, that's commuting distance. So effectively the whole world is commuting distance of itself, which means socially it collapses sort of into one city and its suburbs in terms of people mixing everywhere. At that point it's perfectly practicable to live in the Bahamas, work in Tokyo, have lunch in Paris, while your spouse or roommate works in Chile, and this is no problem because you can go all around. A couple generations into that, it's very difficult to have a society where people feel that their political identity is bound to a place because people's experiences are all over. And if you got married and moved to the Bahamas or moved there with your roommates and had children, they would identify culturally perhaps with you, perhaps with where they went to college, not necessarily with where you live because they might spend very little time there. So the nations have adapted to be non-geographic. All of the nations exist all over the earth. Citizens of all of the nations live all over the earth. And your law is what governs you personally, that you've selected to be a member of this nation. And everyone walking around you may be governed by a completely different legal system, so that nations mix everywhere.
And it's fascinating society, and the ramifications of that are interesting. And also, one of the other things in the society is the sort of place and non-place of religion.
Yes, that discussion of religion is banned and churches are banned, but religion is not banned, which is a subtle distinction. This is a society which has a lot of anxiety about religion and religious discourse and organized religion causing war. People refer to the church war, which is some terrible, disastrous, presumably Third World War that has happened in their past, though, in our future. And as a result of that and a result of fear of organized religion coming after that, they've banned any kind of religious discussion. So 3 people talking about religion in a room is legally a church meeting, and illegal.
Yes.
But everyone is expected to have personal relationships with spirituality and a personal philosophy, whether it's theist or atheist. So there's a profession called a sensayer, which is sort of part priest, part psychotherapist, who travels to people's homes and is supposed to have a sort of one-on-one discussion session with you where you talk about theological questions and metaphysical questions. And the sensayer is not allowed to recommend any belief or ever let you know what the sensayer's belief is, but is supposed to help you develop a personal religion. So thinking of the quote that during the Reformation, people were worried that if Christianity kept splitting, soon there would be as many Christianities as there were Christians, because they would all be different. This is the society who prides itself on having as many religions as there are human beings, each one developing it themselves, some theists, some atheists.
The dialogue with the sensei is just fascinating, as it's one of the characters in the book, and as he tries to bring out what the person is feeling without actually telling them what to do, and without, like you said, without recommending, gives you these wonderful dialogue.
And I try to communicate in those dialogues how difficult that is, how hard it is to hide privileging one thing over another. The sensayer system is in no way a perfect system. It's a very, very challenging system for this society to try to maintain. And it's intended to be partly very interesting, hey, having a personal counselor to talk to about religion, that might be cool, but also partly alienating. Wait a minute, this is censorship in a very fierce way. This is a society that has a lot of censorship. So people often ask me, is this book a utopia or a dystopia? Because if there's censorship, people always want to assume it's a dystopia. But on the other hand, flying cars, futuristic cities, moon base, life expectancy of 150 years, that sounds like a utopia. And the answer is that either it's both or neither, but it's a future which is better in a bunch of ways and worse in a few other ways, which is exactly the relationship the present has to the past.
Yeah.
Better in some ways, but worse in other ways. And the book asks you to think hard about, are these sacrifices worth those gains? How would you feel if this was the future your lifetime's efforts are building? Because, of course, we don't know.
Yeah, right, right. And one thing I found interesting in it as I was looking into your background is you're a historian.
Yes.
Yet you chose to write your first novel about the future, which is going to be really hard to do historical research on. So how did your work as, in your life as a historian help or hinder your writing about the future?
I think it was a huge help in particularly shaping the way I went about the world building, because I ask the kinds of questions a historian asks, and I want in the science fiction future to be able to answer all of those questions that a historian is going to think of that people who aren't historians don't necessarily think of or want to answer. So, what do people think politics is, or where do they think states came from? What has happened to monarchy? Is it popular? Is it unpopular? Especially because a lot of science fiction is a very modern, very 20th century genre. It goes back before that, but much of what shaped current science fiction is very 20th century. 20th century thought tends to assume democracy is going to be commonplace. Monarchy is going to be rare, and when it's around, it's going to be tyrannical. But democracy, monarchy, aristocracy have come in and out over the course of human history. Aristotle talks about how they come in and out. So when I'm imagining a future, I think, well, there's been a king of Spain for hundreds and hundreds of years. In several hundred years, there will probably still be a king of Spain. He'll probably do something different that isn't what the king of Spain does now, because what the king of Spain does now isn't what the king of Spain did 500 years ago. Yeah. But this is a flexible institution that's been able to adapt in the past and continue to do so. I think a lot about examples, for example, the Roman Senate, and we think of Rome falling, right, in the 400s AD. The Roman Senate had started out when it's just a city and is governing the city, then it becomes a big republican empire. The Senate shifts how it works, now it's a governing body of an empire. Then there's an emperor, now the Senate is a subsidiary body that's sometimes advisory or sometimes organizing resistance to the emperor. Then Rome falls, but the Senate is still there. Now they're advising the Visigothic kings. The Visigothic kings go away, now we have a republic, so the Senate is still there. And in the Middle Ages, you still have people appealing to the Senate, claiming to be descended from the Senate. In the Renaissance, you have noble families in Rome whose claim to nobility is, my ancestors were senators hundreds of years ago, and they're organizing political resistance to the papacy. And even now, the descendants of the Orsini and Colonna families still hold hereditary positions in the Vatican.
Wow.
This is descended from the Roman Senate. So that political institution has done 17 different things under 17 different governmental structures over the course of a millennium and a half. So, or actually more than 2 millennia. So there's no reason to believe that it won't continue to have new different features in the future. I made a future which is made out of the puzzle pieces of the past, just as the present really is made out of puzzle pieces of past political systems that have been taken, repurposed, and reused.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought that having the training and mindset of a historian would be that useful in creating a future, but you're right. You need to look at it like from somebody beyond that, looking back, and then see, how a civilization is created. You know how worlds are built.
Right, and people joke that the phrase "it's as different as night and day" is kind of a silly phrase because there's nothing more similar to day than night. There are spans of time, approximately 12 hours, that vary with the seasons. One of them's dark, one of them's light, but otherwise, there's nothing you can name that's more similar to day than night. There's nothing you can name that's more similar to the future than the past. But long periods of time, things changing over that time, and the more you know about it, the more you can say, these are, what are things that are stable, what are things that are unstable? So, for example, the nuclear family is a very recent, very modern thing. Before that, we had different extended family structures and clan systems. So, as a historian, I said, I bet the nuclear family won't persist into the next several centuries, that the family will change again. And then I sat down to think, okay, in what ways might it change, and I came up with a particular way it might change. If you asked me to predict the future, I wouldn't say it'll be that way as opposed to others, but I bet you the nuclear family will change just as it's actually very new.
Something else that I found really interesting about the writing in the book is language. Language, both for the characters and in that world, and in the way it was written, was interesting, because this is 25th century.
Right.
And you decided, no, I'm not going to write it because it's kind of a first-person narrative in it. You decided not to come up with a 25th century language, but you have Mycroft, the person writing the book, write it in an archaic language.
Right. And again, you know, people in the Renaissance write lots of histories trying to imitate ancient Rome in their style. We now write, you know, fake Jane Austen. So people in the future will also imitate voices of the past. And I thought it would be an interesting way to create past-future dialogue, to write a piece in which a future narrator is trying to imitate a past style. And then we as the reader are sort of caught in between these two things, because we are not in the time period that he's imitating, nor are we in the time period that he's writing for. We're in between, and either way, when he's guessing, he's missing.
Ah, see, my historical knowledge isn't that great.
Right.
So he's not doing that good a job of...
Right, he's doing a pretty good 18th century job, but you're not from the 18th century, you're from the 21st century,
as far
and
as
bits
you
of
know.
the 20th century. Right, so as you read it, Mycroft is pretending that he's thinking that you're from the 18th century. Or sometimes he's assuming you're from his 25th century. And so he'll say, oh, dear reader, you know, gentle reader, whom I am addressing as if you're an 18th century nobleman, I'm sure you're offended by this thing which is offensive in the 25th century. And you say, no, actually, I wasn't offended by that at all, because I'm not from the 25th century. But it's interesting to learn from you, Mycroft, that whatever this is would be offensive. And, you know, so for example, he apologizes for using he and she.
Right, there's a whole section as he discusses about how I'm really sorry, but this is how it was done, and they're not like us. And that's where the language itself is important in that time, in the 25th century.
Right.
Because the way you speak of things is prescribed in some
Well, again,
ways.
it's a society with both active censorship, you know, and the book itself begins with that long list of
the
permissions
book.
and censorship that he's allowed to have.
Yeah, kind of almost like offensive warnings for this and that, and it's been approved by this hive and
that
approved
group
by that.
And the King of Spain.
Yes.
And that's both an imitation of the 18th century, when nothing in France could be printed without a page of this has been approved by the censors and the Inquisition. So that's an imitation of that. But it's also telling you what are the powers in the 25th century that would have the ability to silence this author. You learn so much about a world by seeing what it would censor and who is censoring it. Yeah. And so this is a world with both ferocious censorship in some sense, but it's always censorship that's hypothetically protecting you from dangerous things. Very
most censorship is.
Yeah, and then also very fierce cultural taboos. So it's considered culturally taboo, for example, to listen in on the conversation of people who are speaking a different group's language. That's invasive the same way peeking at somebody in the shower would be invasive, and that you don't do it. And the narrator apologizes sometimes, saying, I feel uncomfortable that I understand Japanese because I have no right to understand Japanese, but it's serving you, dear reader, that I tell you so. Apologetic to the Japanese people, I'm going to tell you what they're saying.
I do love the way he, as in that style, is talking to the dear reader.
Yes.
Yes. Now, we've talked about your writing, we've talked about being a historian. Let's talk a little bit about your work as a composer, because you're a composer, singer, musician too?
Yes. Carpal tunnel has unfortunately interfered with instrumental stuff.
Yeah, and you, check the name of this now, you were with Sassafrass?
Yeah.
You do a cappella work, and you've got things out, and one of the major things you've done is Viking-based?
Yes. So I composed a set of, these are very complex polyphonic a cappella pieces. So think of Renaissance music, that very interweaving polyphony, often modal, very unmodern sounding. And I did a bunch of those setting Viking mythology stories to music. So there's a Viking creation myth song, and there's a Ragnarok song, and there's a Death of Balder song, and there's an Odin and Loki yelling and being angry at each other piece called My Brother, My Enemy, about their blood brother relationship. And when you put the pieces together, they create an overarching narrative that gives you sort of the fundamentals of that thread within Viking mythology, which we then presented as a stage play actually here at Balticon a couple years ago and filmed.
Right, I found that really interesting how much science fiction fandom has been involved in your composing and in the presentation of your music.
Well, because I had composed a little bit when I was in college, and we had sung it in college a cappella, and then I had actually stopped. And it was when I was here at Balticon, and a friend dragged me to the Filk room, and then said, "Hey, let's sing that song we used to sing back in college," and we sang it, and everyone exploded in enthusiasm and said, "That was great! You've got to." Oh. That was great. You've got to do more. You've got to compose more, and that enthusiasm got me to start composing again. We started performing again, and we recorded again, and then eventually it developed into this big project, really supported literally by Kickstarter, but socially by this community of fandom broadly, and especially of Balticon.
And that's really, and it's like a stage play too?
Yeah. And we filmed it here at Balticon, so there's a DVD, and we have costumes that are very, very period accurate.
That's
and,
great.
Yeah,
you do
really.
so many things.
Each project is a break from the other projects.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think
So what's coming up new? Is there going to be more, I believe, in the
Terra Ignota series?
Terra Ignota, yes.
Yeah, there are 3 more books in this series. It's a 4-volume series. The second one, Seven Surrenders, comes out in December, so very short wait between
December
the first 2
2016.
volumes. Yes. And the 3rd volume is also done and should be out fairly quickly after those. So working away on book 4 right now.
And so what is the plan for you after you get these books done? Do you have any other books in mind?
I've got a couple of other series that I've been doing the world building prep for.
And you also do short fiction, right?
No,
no,
I've never
you don't.
done. No,
You
I
haven't.
blog, and I love essay writing. I blog about history, philosophy, travel, gelato. Food.
Gelato.
Yes, I have a gelato atlas where you can look up places to get good gelato all over the world. Because I'm a historian mainly of Italy, so I spent a lot of time in Florence and in Rome and developed strong gelato knowledge, and therefore wanted to share that gelato knowledge.
Well, let me thank you. And I want to thank you for being here. It's been delightful, fascinating. I've learned a lot.
My pleasure.
And thanks for joining us here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be at Balticon, my
Yes,
home
it is.
con.
Yes, it is. And so that's it for all of us here at Fast Forward. This is Mike Zipser saying, take care.